We're aerospace and defense deep tech fund. Honestly, most of the industry right now is coming from small companies that are innovating and moving fast. DoD has recognized this for over a decade. They've been putting money to help support companies get across what's called the valley of death, to build a product that eventually will get you to the point where you can sell it to the government. We come in at a point where companies are at the later cycle, where they've proven that they can build and deliver certain equipment and tech for the US government, and we help kind of support them to get across that finish line. In venture, my business equation is very simple, right? My clients are my investors and my product are the companies that I invest in. I need to make sure that my product can generate an outcome enough to be able to attract my clients. Our edge is we're not generalists, we're specialists, right? We focus on a specific industry where we have certain access that most other investors don't have access, and we have the ability to actually influence an outcome of the investments we make.
Welcome, everyone. We are here for another episode of The Flow Show. Big shout out to our two title sponsors, Karate Combat and Bet 105. And today we will have Kyle Mounts, who is the co-founder and chief investment officer of Aero X Ventures, with us today. Kyle, how are you?
Thanks. I appreciate it. So, do a few things on the day-to-day. My primary role is general partner and chief investment officer for Aero X Ventures.
Okay.
We're aerospace and defense deep tech fund, early stage seed Series A investments. We're early in our cycle. We just completed Fund 1. We're a $15 million fund plus another $5 million SPV outside of it. So we're about 20 million AUM. We've made 12 investments to date.
Wow.
And my goal right now is primarily focusing on Fund 2. So we're raising a little bit larger fund. It's 100 million, but still in my world, it's still very small. Right. So we've got some ways to go, but our number one goal is to become an institutionalized firm. And right now there's not, better said, there's, quite a few players in our space that just are focusing on aerospace and defense. But we'd like to think that we're bringing a very unique perspective and different approach and doing what we're doing. And I will tell you, we punch way above our weight class. We've got an advisory board, probably 15, 20 deep, that have not only been in the investment world for most of their career, but have run very large organizations. So when we make an investment, we make it very impactful. And our intent is to not only be in a position where we think we can help influence an outcome that will lead to better investment returns for our LPs, but that will have a meaningful impact on the business. Through our connections.
And the space is super interesting. I was just kind of taking a quick look at everything, and it seems like at this moment in time, it's such a relevant space. So how is that something you've been in? Is this more recent, or have you been in this for a long time?
So I'd like to say that we were in it before it got sexy.
Okay.
Right? Because when I was talking about aerospace and defense and drones, and it was kind of a new topic, right? Back in 2020. Mm-hmm. Especially in the investment world, venture capital has not always been a big proponent of making investments, especially into military tech, right? Things that are killing people. And that's not an area we focus on specifically, but it is a function of the industry, right? We focus on things that are in helping support our national security, and war is changing. It is evolving, and it really, in order for us to stay competitive at a global scale, we need to innovate, right? We need to, so that honestly, most of the industry right now is coming from small companies that are innovating and moving fast. And they're, the larger incumbents, the big primes can't move that fast. And so, DoD has recognized this for over a decade. They've been putting money to help support companies get across what's called the valley of death.
Okay.
Which is companies that need to raise enough capital to become an actual contractor for the Department of Defense. That just takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money. And it's kind of, somewhat of a catch-22 where you've got to have enough money to build a product that eventually will get you to the point where you can sell it to the government. Right? But, technically the government does require you to prove that you can actually build something and and deploy it in real time, but you can't do that without selling it to the government, right? So there's a lot of programs that the government has implemented to help get this tech to, I would say mission capable, fast. And we come in at a point where companies are at the later cycle of that, where they've proven that they can build and deliver certain equipment and tech for the U.S. government. Mm-hmm. And we help kind of support them to get across that finish line.
And how is that when you are working with government contracts and dealing with this type of thing? How complicated is that? Was it easier or harder than you thought? Because it does seem like a very interesting sort of bridge to get in there.
So my background is not in defense.
Okay.
My background has always been in finance. And I started at Wells Fargo, started at the bank, even as a teller, kind of grew my way through the corporate ladder. So I mostly spent most of my career in some kind of finance role. How I got into this space was because through our family office, my father's very successful. He's had quite a bit of successful outcomes in his career that has led him to building a family office. And at the ground floor, I kind of helped build that with him. And at the time, he had this vision where our local community was actually not taking full advantage of the airport assets. And the airport was qualified for commercial airspace and commercial travel, but wasn't bringing in commercial flights.
Mm-hmm. Now, a quick message from our title sponsor, Bet105, who has the best odds in the game. They deliver with -105 odds on most markets. Better pricing, bigger profits, no limits on winners means they will not ban you for being good. And you can enjoy fast crypto payouts, instant withdrawals, and no hassle. Join the poker community where winning is welcome. Use promo code POKER and get a $50 bonus free bet when you deposit your first $100 today. So you grew up in that area?
Yeah, well, didn't necessarily grew up there, but yeah, I spent the past 13 years there, and now I'm down here in Miami.
Okay.
But yeah, so Winston-Salem was not taking full advantage of its local airport. And, my father has always been an entrepreneur at heart and an innovator, and thinking of areas where, there are things that are coming that are either being highly disruptive with the use of technology, right? Or revitalizing assets for new purpose.
Got it.
And, the airport was an asset that just was not being used to its full capacity. And so long story short, we put together a Future of Flight initiative that was funded out of my father's foundation. And as soon as that kicked off, it got a lot of tailwinds. We got a lot of state legislators and local support behind it to basically fund the revitalization of that airport.
Okay.
Which then kind of started to expand to become a statewide project. So we formed a nonprofit called Aero X, which is a 501c3, 501c6 today. And it takes in state funds to procure all the ground-based infrastructure for beyond visual line of sight for commercial drones. So today you can fly a drone up for as long as you can see it, but as soon as it leaves your visual line of sight, it becomes illegal.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
Wow.
So for applications like medical package delivery, infrastructure inspection, and public safety, it's not very scalable, right? Because you need to be able to fly long distances, and you need to be able to do it autonomously. And in some cases, like an N-to-1 ratio, meaning you need to not just have one pilot for every drone, you need to have one pilot for like 20 or 40 drones.
Okay.
Right? So
that's your company, Aero X Ventures. That is where you co-founded.
The birth of Aero X Ventures actually came from the nonprofit.
Got it.
So I helped my father build that strategy out. And I kind of acted as CFO for the nonprofit, served as a director. But when we received state funds, we had to put out an RFI to basically bring in some of the best talent and technology to build out the core infrastructure that the state was going to use at eventually a statewide level and potentially even a national level. Mm-hmm. Right. So we had to take our time really making sure that the companies that were providing that core infrastructure, which was multiple technology stacks, kind of knew what they were doing and were well qualified. Well, when we did that, we got over 800, almost 1,000 companies that had submitted an application to be part of this infrastructure. And when we looked across that, there was a whole bunch of startups that were actually outperforming the big guys. And, naturally, me as an entrepreneur, but also one that I just feel like put on this earth to be a venture capitalist.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and there is an investment opportunity here. So that's when we started to build this thesis around, hey, we could really invest into some of these companies that are providing the picks and shovels of the industry, not just, the drones or the drone operators, right? I'm talking about like the core technology and software that's enabling autonomous flight, enabling robots, and cybersecurity, right? You've got all these components that kind of make up the entire ecosystem that had yet to really scale and grow, and recognizing how that was occurring in the commercial sector gave us a sense to say, hey, what's going on in the world of drones and where are we seeing success and how had it evolved? Well, our Defense Department had about a decade head start on the commercial sector. So that's where we started to look.
How far ahead is the military? But you always hear this type of like, oh, they're X amount of years. Like in general, what would you be the estimation of technology that military is ahead on, like what we get to see or no? Just a rough guess or ballpark on stuff.
Honestly, they're behind, right?
Oh, really?
I think that's just my unique perspective, right? I think I've been in this space now for about 5-6 years, looking across companies that are building some really cool things. And if it wasn't for those new companies, right, our government would be very behind. And they are behind because we're kind of getting our ass kicked by China, Russia, some other countries, right? And we saw in the Ukraine war. People are countries that have a purpose are just finding a way to deploy these assets without all the red tape.
Yep.
And specifically in our commercial sector in the US, the FAA has really kind of had this opportunity to advance commercial drones for the past 10, 15 years, but really hasn't, right? But at the same time, our Department of Defense also has some constraints and some red tape that make it very difficult for startups to really deploy and get this tech in the hands of warfighters.
I got asked that just how my mind works. I see these drones and you kind of, I went to a live golf here and I saw this, like, they were like, it was like a tank in the air, this drone. And I'm sure there's all kinds of crazy stuff. But it seems like a pretty big security risk, or just in general, it could be a problem in the future. Like if drones are able to just, cause it's not like at events or places, there's no like, it's like, yeah, sure, the White House or places probably have, they have systems and stuff to like whatever, but what about just at like local places? Like it seems like you could really do some harm with these type of drones and where it's going.
Absolutely. That's why some of that core infrastructure involves counter UAS measures or unmanned air systems, right? So counter UAS is basically the form to protect, right, against anyone using drones for the wrong purpose. Right. Now, technically, within a controlled airspace, right? Like, for example, what we're doing in North Carolina, we have these big radars that sit, kind of across the city. We have 1,000 square miles and there's a lot of redundancy in the middle. So thing picks up even birds flying, right? But you're supposed to have what's, considered to be detect and avoidance systems on board a drone that prevent things from flying into each other, but also can localize themselves and figure out where things are. So you have to have some kind of ID that transmits basically who owns that vehicle, what's its purpose, et cetera, right? So if something is happening within our airspace where it cannot be identified, then there's countermeasures to manage that.
Got it.
Right? So a big focus within industry, which, by the way, the Department of Defense have been doing this for years, right? Which is, how do you have certain countermeasures to protect core infrastructure from $100,000 drone blowing up a substation that's worth $1 billion, right? You have to have certain countermeasures. There's spoofing and jamming, and there's obviously projectile or lethal.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Countermeasures to manage that. So that has already been happening in the defense world for many years, and we're basically taking and using the best practices and applying that to the commercial sector.
Wow. So you were in Philadelphia. You're at Wharton for how many years were you there?
I was at Wharton, but I was in the program where you travel for 2 years every other weekend up to Philly. It's called the Wharton or MBA program for executives.
Okay.
And
That's
it's
cool.
it's we do everything a 2-year student does, but and it come back time
Nice.
with a full-time job.
Very
So
cool. My dad's whole side family was there. My dad's dad was a dean there. My dad went to Penn.
Is that right?
My aunts went to Penn, both of them. And like, yeah, I spent a lot of time in Philadelphia.
Honestly, one of the best experiences I've ever had. I mean, some of the most meaningful relationships that I have today are from that program.
Yeah, it's obviously a great school and a great place. So you're out of there, and then where from there? When you got done at Wharton, where did you go directly from there?
Directly, I went into building out the fund. Okay. So I'd been putting together the fund strategy while I was at Wharton and building out some of the nonprofit in combination of running some aviation companies. We had a fractional jet company that kind of competed with NetJets and Wheels Up. So I ran that company for a little while. We had a flight school. Still have a flight school.
Are you a pilot? Do you have your license?
That's the one thing I don't do. I am not like one that just will commit the time that's required to be a good pilot.
Yeah.
Right. I just don't have that kind of passion for it. I respect it, but I'd rather be flown than fly.
Yes, makes sense. Me too. Very cool. So, and tell me about the fund though. Was this something, because you're at Wharton, you think about doing this fund, you have a successful first fund, you raise the money, but was it difficult? How difficult was that part?
Incredibly difficult to raise because when I graduated Wharton, it was 2021.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and, right after.
That was right after everything. But during COVID, the venture ecosystem had a bubble. Right, because there's so much money coming in to private markets that basically, when you've got money managers that are just flush with cash, well, where do they put that? They usually put that in more risky assets when you've over allocated to all your other asset classes. So venture started to get this influx of all this capital, right? And that basically required venture firms to deploy more capital, which made the venture ecosystem more competitive, and then eventually jacked up prices on the companies you're investing in. Because as a founder, if I'm getting a term sheet over here at $100 million valuation, and this guy's giving me the same amount of money, but at a $200 million valuation, taking half the dilution, right, on that raise, of course I'm going to take that. So basically people, in order to compete to get into the best companies, had to overpay. Right. And when you overpay, that impacts your return profile, right? Because your return is based on your entry price and your exit price. And then, of course, the IPO markets after debt, markets started to go haywire, became more difficult. So we weren't getting exits. So basically, you've got all these variables that made this bubble in venture when everybody was paying high prices. It was highly competitive, and all those venture firms and fund managers couldn't exit their positions. So that means the investors that were giving them the money weren't getting money back, and that obviously made it very unattractive to participate as an LP because you're not getting your money back, right? So we started raising capital in the hardest time in the down cycle of venture, right? Which actually, if you look historically over the past 2 decades, some of the best firms, I like to say this because it serves me, right? Is some of the best firms that raise capital in those times and prove they could actually raise, actually ended up being the best funds long term.
Interesting,
right? Because as the venture ecosystem crashed, right, venture was deploying less capital, and we really got to a point where, because everyone wasn't deploying, we as a new firm with really kind of dry powder could start investing without as much competition, right? And it was becoming difficult for founders to raise because a lot of the founders that were raising capital in just, a deck, right, and a few meetings had to show traction. So it became a little bit more of a higher standard on raising capital. So basically we're coming in at a point where, hey, prices are lower and the companies that we're investing in have more traction than as compared to, the past couple of years. And so it was a perfect time to deploy capital, but it was a really hard time to raise.
You're talking with an investor or someone that may come into the fund, just to give an idea, what is the minimum investment and sort of the max or what's the largest, like how big of a gap is that? And have you found it really, this climate currently, how challenging is it? You said it was really hard.
Still hard.
It's still
gotten
a little
hard,
better though.
Right, it's gotten a little bit better, but raising fund one is like, one of the hardest things to do because you don't have a track record. You can't look at your investor and say, give me your money and trust me, right? Because I've got all of these results to show for it, right? I'm coming in and telling you that, hey, I have an idea on where the market opportunities are, and I have somewhat of a proof of concept that I can access those deals, and a proof of concept on managing the outcome of those portfolio investments. But I really don't have like the tangible track record to be able to show you that I can do this.
Right.
So you're basically, telling investors at that point that, hey, just trust me.
And in your head,
what like harder.
Tell me like fund one, in terms of what you realistically expected to return and what you did.
Yeah.
Like where is it usually? Do you notice that people they always think bigger and it's not as good, or do you try to overpromise, over deliver? What's your sort of?
I'm definitely under promise, over deliver.
Okay.
We as a firm, again, I think we punch way above our weight class, and just the level of technical skill set and intellect on our team is very high. It's actually enabled us to access some of the best talent and technology in the entire industry. We led Privateer Space's Series A, which was Steve Wozniak's space company that he co-founded with Alex Fielding. And, we were, I would say, somewhat competitive with some other top tier firms in that. And because of who our team was and because of our relationships with that CEO, it really enabled us to access that, right? So as for a first-time fund and getting access to some of these deals as either lead or follow-on investor, it was a big deal, right? So I would say we've had a lot of success in being able to show that we can access, right, some of the best deals and also invest in the deals that are rightly priced. But it's a little bit too early to tell right now on whether or not, we're going to be successful. We've had meaningful, what's called internal rate of return, right, on our portfolio, where we only mark up the value of our investments because we made 10 investments to date. The value of those investments are a reflection of the most recent pricing round that the company has raised capital on. And we get to mark up based on that new valuation, right? So technically we're like at a 2 times to what we paid in total value, but we've only had 3 companies mark up. There are companies underlying have been performing, they just haven't raised capital in order for us to mark up. But most importantly, we have to exit, right, in order to be able to show returns.
What's the minimum? What's the minimum amount someone can come into the fund?
Sorry.
Just because I'm on the, and is it a cutoff?
It's an accredited investor, right? So we took in 44 investors for fund 1. Got it. Minimum check size was like 250. Fund 2, it will step up a little bit, but for everyone that participated in fund, there'll be no minimum, but right now we have to step it up to probably 500 to $1 million. But as to participate in our initial close, that'll be happening in the next couple months, it's like 5 million or more. So it's more family offices, more institutions, more of some of the big guys that have to play.
Do you feel... I look at the sort of, I always try to, again, this is not a poker podcast, but we played a bit of poker and I want to talk about that a little bit. But in terms of, I've done a lot of different in poker, like where I'm either staked or people sold some action. Do you feel a responsibility when it's like more so like, how is that experience when you're investing yourself versus when people, hey, someone puts $1 million or $2 million,
100%.
How do you sort of deal with that mentally?
For me, that's what keeps me up at night, right? For the people that I have asked to trust me, that really ended up making that decision to trust me, I have to be able to show them a return, right? There's no way that I can look them in the face and say, I've lost your money. Right. This is not going to happen.
But see, that's the crazy part, because what percent of funds roughly are successful or not?
It's pretty low.
Right.
It's pretty low. Right.
That's a tough thing, because that is a mentally, it's a heavy thing to take on when you do that, and then it doesn't work. Also, not just like, okay, it sucks that you lose, but like, I think mentally and to be able to
we will win, no doubt. Right. Right now we're forecasted at about 5.5x of total invested capital, which at a net will return, close to about 4 or 5 times our investors' money. And that's conservative in my mind, based on the trajectory of some of these portfolio companies. But you have to be able to generate those kind of returns in order to be, in venture, right? Yeah. Because if people are going to invest in venture, they're going to expect a higher return for the trade-off of higher risk and no liquidity.
Yep.
Right. So we, as fund managers, at a minimum, are looking at a 30% IRR per year. So if we can't generate a 30% IRR per year, we're not doing our job.
Yep.
So right now we're forecasting at about 40 to 50%. And today we're generating over 50%.
Nice.
IRR.
Okay. So that's, and this will be, what's your goal with all, do you expect, I mean, next fund, how many funds just
basically right now, since we've fully deployed out of fund one, and we've sourced over 1,500 companies in this industry, and we've got at least 100 that we think could be immediately accessible to deploy again. So a lot of the big, kind of the heavy lifting on the front end on, building out a team, building out processes for investment selection, investment committee, right, and portfolio management have already been done. Like the core infrastructure of what we've built today is there.
Got it.
And we've sourced companies that we believe are going to be perfect for just deploying a little bit more capital than what we did in fund one. So, I would say fund two raising capital should be a little bit easier. But it's still an interesting market, right? Where everyone's just kind of still on the edge of like, hey, do I hold on to cash or do I invest? But in my mind, there's no wrong time to invest in the venture. It's one of the highest performing asset classes. I feel like I'm pitching my fund here.
No. That's super interesting. I think that, at least on my, done about 220 podcasts. I haven't really done much fun stuff. So I think it's interesting.
But on a relation to poker, right? Because you and I like to play poker.
Yeah.
It's a high stake. It's a people business, right? You're investing into people and you're quantifying your bets and you're managing risk, right? And so on the poker table, kind of playing the odds a little bit, right? But you're also playing the player. And if you can have an edge on the player, you oftentimes have an edge on the game.
Yep.
And, I'd like to think that we have a little bit of edge on the player and not just, who our team is, but the types of entrepreneurs that we look and how we invest.
Makes sense. I have two questions poker related, so I won't forget. First, are you familiar with Kelly criterion? Okay, so let's shout out to Phil Locke, who he taught me this, but it's a very famous mathematician. I think his name was Kelly. I forget his first name, but basically about bet sizes, like on how much you should risk based on, let's say, your net worth. How much do you want to bet on something, right? If you have $1 million and you think you have like a 60% chance of winning, what is the appropriate bet size with the odds, right, for your net worth? So I guess the way I'd sort of phrase this is if you haven't. Let's use $100,000 of that you want to invest or use money. What would you recommend for people to put into venture investing versus crypto versus stocks versus savings? How do you kind of break up your pie chart?
So there's actually, the portfolio theory has a very specific answer on this, right? It is relative to risk. It's like, hey, how much beta am I willing to take to generate alpha, right? Which is, how much volatility do I want to accept in my investments, and how much risk am I taking in order to get the outsized return, right? So obviously, if you have assets that have a little bit more beta, right, i.e. venture capital, private equity, they're much more volatile, right? They're ups and downs, but they over time have generated the highest level return. But there's a trade-off again for that. So
for the risk reward.
You don't want to put all your eggs in that basket, right? The right diversification for anyone investing into private markets is going to be dependent on their risk tolerance. But usually for kind of the professional institutional managers, somewhere between 10 and 20% into private markets.
Okay.
Personally, I have over 50% in private markets because I think that's where we can generate the highest level of return.
And what's your demographic normally? What age group or typically would you say is like that invests most?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of all over the scope, but it's mostly guys that have had a lot of success in their career and they're not new to venture.
Yeah.
But we do have some individuals that also on our team who have been running companies, at multi-billion-dollar level for their entire career, and they retire and they're like, what do I do with all this money and this time, right? So, maybe I want to get my hands dirty. So we have a few like really solid operators that have had a very successful career that they're just starting to dabble a little bit in the venture. And, we're also the opportunity to not only just to invest, but to get their hands dirty in like operations and do what they've, loved to do their entire career. So it kind of does a little bit depend on where you're at in your life and, And
I want to ask you about your team and your due diligence and how hands-on, like for yourself, are you part of that process? Or are you more about going and raising the funds and going, taking meetings or
My primary role is to ensure we've got capital to invest.
Okay.
Right. Because, if we can source investment opportunities all day long, but if we don't have money to invest, it's really not much of a business. So in the venture, right, because I'm building a business, in venture, my business equation is very simple, right? My clients are my investors and my product are the companies that I invest in, right? And they're both a function of one another, right? So I need to make sure that my product can generate an outcome enough to be able to attract my clients, right? So I have to have a really good product and team and the companies that we invest in. But, I will tell you, it's hard.
Yeah.
All right. It's hard.
How many, talk me through your team. Is it, you said six, is it 15, 20, 30 people? How many people actually, what goes into a venture?
Yeah. Running a venture firm is not, it doesn't take a lot of human capital.
Okay.
We have, I would say we're a little top heavy, right? We've got, 4, let's say main general partners in the fund, that we kind of manage and do a little bit something different. And we've got, associate, analyst, and we've got on our strategic advisory board about 15, right? That we kind of bring in on a case-by-case basis based on either, hey, we're looking at this company, we need help underwriting, or we looking at this company, do you know someone in this area that could help? And, once we get to that decision, then of course we decide, okay, who's the right person to manage the investment. But, you don't need a big team. We're actually utilizing a lot of internal AI tools to grow the company. We've been building an internal proprietary sourcing tool for the past 2 years that we've had probably 4 or 5 interns come in from some of the top schools around the country and help us build this thing. And it's responsible for like 60% of our deal flow today. Wow. So,
AI just it's really is. And then your space and the Aero tech and venture, all this stuff.
It's like, honestly, when I came in, I was like, okay, if we're in venture and we care about innovation, we care about, advancing, right? Being more efficient, we should be doing that ourselves.
Yeah.
So like, let's get ahead of the curve and find out how we can optimize and be an efficient organization. And so, for fun too, we'll bring on a few more hires, but it'll be less than 10 full-time.
Yep.
And that's a lot. I mean, you can see some venture teams running over $1 billion of assets with probably like, 10, 15 people. Right. But you can have like stacks of individuals that are participants in the fund. You can have advisors to the fund that are sometimes exclusive or non-exclusive. You can have venture partners that are out there sourcing deals and helping you raise capital, but they're not full-time. And you can just have other people in your ecosystem that are just helping you do various things. But that's the primary thing for venture capital. You're sourcing, right? And you're selecting, you're managing portfolio, and then you're finding ways to exit your positions. And the best venture funds usually do, 2 out of 3 things really, really well. We're trying to focus on all 3.
Very cool.
And that's where Singularity Capital Advisors was born too. So I know we didn't get there yet, but
I love that. I love the name. I mentioned before Bill Perkins, who has been on multiple times on the podcast, one of my closest friends, and has his boat named Singularity and that concept. Do you want to talk to you about that, the Matrix and all this? I want to get into some fun stuff here, but tell me about that as well.
So again, those 3 things in venture are really important, arguably the most important on exiting, right? So, looking at that concept and recognize we want to build one of the best firms out there, we've got to be really good at exiting. What does that mean? Well, we've got to understand where companies are being sold in our industry, who they're being sold to, right? And then compare that back to how we're investing to make sure that there's a return profile that meets the expectations of venture capital. And we just started doing a lot of market research, looking at companies within, especially defense ecosystems. And, getting to know some of the other investment bankers. And long story short, we had this company, Apogee Engineering, over 600 employees. They managed all of the cybersecurity training for Space Force. And they had some other meaningful service contracts, and over 400 of their employee bases were all top level security clearances.
Okay.
3 owners in the business, generating over 150 million of revenue. And they wanted to sell. And through our relationships, we got to know them, and it just kind of, and not unexpectedly, they asked, "Hey, can you help us sell?" And my prior background as a banker and some of our team's experience, and we said, actually, you know what? This will be a good exercise for us. Let's go through and really understand how companies specifically in defense are being sold, right? And so we helped advise that company to an exit last year. That then created this opportunity. It's like, wow, there's some really solid investment banks in this industry, but not someone as hands-on and boutique as, we think what was required for some of the mid-market companies that are being valued at like 25 to 150 million.
Yeah.
So I think there's probably an opportunity to build a firm here, but more importantly, if we're building relationships by going through that process and helping people sell their company, we can also build relationships with buyers.
Yeah.
Right. And that can give us a sense for where buyer appetite is. Right. That all indirectly feeds back to being a venture capitalist on saying, hey, let's make sure that any investment that we do make aligns with at least where we see the exits happening. Right. So
it's very interesting. And
So anyways, buy side and sell side M&A advisory. That's what Singularity Capital Advisors does.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And side note, tattoo there. You have multiple. What's that one? What's that?
Oh yeah.
Represent?
Okay. So this one's mindset. As you notice, it's not finished. So my mindset will never be finished.
All right.
And this one is the multiverse. But it really signifies choice. You wake up every day, you make certain choices, and
it's cool.
And, ultimately I want to live my highest potential, right? Or my highest lifeline in this multiverse. And that's really, I think, a reflection of my choices that I make every day.
That's cool. When did you get those?
2 years ago, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. I got this one for my mom. I got one on my back. Getting a few. I like tattoos.
That's cool. And speaking of,
do you have tattoos?
I actually have one only, and it was a wager from a long time ago.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It was for basically I was with a friend, actually Bill Perkins, who I just mentioned, Singularity. We were in Amsterdam and we're talking about tattoos, and was like, "Do you have one?" And he was like, "No." And we came to a thing basically how much you have to be paid to get one. And I then after I know him and I know he's crazy, so I just didn't really want to say something because I was like prepared to actually have to get one. And then I finally set a number, shouted out, and he was like booked. And then I got one the next day, and it was, I couldn't really choose what it was. There was some parameters. So anyway, there's a story on that. I do have it. It's on my back as well. And it's
nice.
Not my personal choice. So yeah, that's a side note. But anyway, but no, I don't have any others, and none that I put on. But I think they are cool, and I've thought about. I've thought about getting some. I do think I think they're cool to self-express yourself, and that's very cool. Speaking of the sort of simulation type, I feel like your mind is in this genre of deep thought, and with AI technology and this sort of inflection point in the world. We talked a little before the podcast. Yeah. Give me sort of your, this stands out to me. And Elon Musk said that it's 1 billion to 1 that we're not in a simulation. What is that type of in thoughts of like a simulation, or how it works with life? Give me a little bit of a thought without going it's a rabbit hole. So
crazy.
Yeah, just like kind of overall, how you'd approach that, because I feel like it is in your sort of space in business where you have to, you do sort of think about these things, and sort of the business investments that you're involved with are kind of in this
I would say this is probably more on a personal level. I think about these things. The intersection, I think, between how I think about, our existence and life, its overlap is in my world mostly with the advancements of technology, right? But maybe just to take it a step back, I think Elon tweeted a little bit ago, was like a few weeks ago, he just said, "Hey, we're on the event horizon," right? Which in physics, you've got this word called the singularity, which basically is the point of no return when entering into a black hole, that we have no idea what the base reality is, right? There's no physics or computer, right, that can tell us what is reality like, right? What are the base underlying elements of reality, inside of a black hole. We just don't know, right? And, the event horizon is basically at that point where all light is sucked into eventually what comes the singularity. Ray Kurzweil, in the CTO of Google, right, the guy that's been inventing stuff for decades, has also been looking at and predicting the advancements of technology, and has had, I think, something like an 80% accuracy on technology, and that he had predicted that, hey, this is how we're going to use this technology at this time. Right. Which is just crazy.
Strong,
Very, very strong predicting track record. Well, he basically had taken this physics terminology, the singularity, and used that in theory to apply what happens when our human civilization uses technology and basically getting to a point where there is no return, right? Like, we have advanced technology so much that we just can no longer predict how our human civilization will use that technology.
Right. It's too all.
It's like, it's too complex,
all over the
right?
world, people have access to stuff and are learning so fast. Yeah.
And so he's basically stolen this word from the physics world and applied it in the technology world, where, hey, we can predict reality on how we will use technology, but it will become a point in time where we can no longer predict what happens, right? And that is the point of no return. We'll never be able to look back. He says the point of singularity in technology will hit by 2045. So this is like literally in the next 20 years.
And it's also, it's feasible that prediction, that could be even, it's so is it now, and it could be in 5 years.
He's been predicting all this, right, for a number of years. And he's basically said, well, I can predict out to 2045. And after that, I can't predict anymore, right? So it's kind of,
you believe that we'll be able to live forever in the sense of uploading consciousness?
So there's 3 ways that we will hit singularity, right? Biotech, nanotech, and AI. And biotech in the physical world, right, is basically, we're being able to manipulate our human body to be able to live eventually forever, right? So if we're impacting on the biomolecular level of us as human beings, right, that's a form of technology, right? Where you're 3D printing organs, or you're doing things that will enable you to maybe reverse aging at some point, right? Like, biotech has made a number of advancements in the past years, but in the next 10 years is supposed to make some of the most biggest advancements, where we may be even be able to get to a point where we could not only be able to have the resources to live forever if we wanted to, but we've been able to impact, certain things like our genome, right? To change and impact disease. There's just so many things that are happening that eventually, if you get to a point where you live forever, like, how do we live as a society? Like, what does that mean? Like, a lot of our motivation and internal, drive comes from recognizing there's an endpoint in this life, right? Where, like, you've got a limited amount of time. What happens when you don't have a limited amount of time? How does that impact your psyche and your behavior? It's like, it's kind of hard to predict where that may go. Nanotechnology is really on the physical world, right? So everything that we touch and see and feel is all atoms, right? Made up of atoms. If you can manipulate at the atomic level, at that point, you're God, right? You can make physically anything that you want. You can also, probably make up, certain things and combine certain atoms to make up things that we don't even know, right, that exist today in the element table, right? So recognizing that, hey, if at that point you can manipulate our physical world, that, who knows what we do with that.
What about Mars? Like, you hear Elon saying 2032 or coming up. Do you feel like in our lifetime, in the next 20, 30 years, that'll be a reality that will be?
Yeah, absolutely. Becoming a multiplanetary species. But anyways, to finish my thought on that, AI too. So you've got biotech, nanotech, and AI, right? The way that we use that technology that eventually will change the way that you and I think, breathe, and live is literally happening now. So, it's a really exciting time to be alive.
Yeah.
Right. And so, my world, I'm like, okay, if I've got 20 years, I mean, right now and before this kind of moment in time comes, what and how can you be part of that? And honestly, for me, being in venture capital is kind of my entry point to helping influence that outcome, because a lot of these technologies and new innovations are funded at this level, right? Now, can obviously I get to a point where, influencing an outcome? No, probably not, but at least contributing to it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of in my world, and at least in my mind, how I think about, my time here on Earth is contributing to the advancements of, these technologies and how we use them as a human species.
Very cool.
But anyway, simulation theory is a whole nother, I think Elon's talked about this actually quite a bit.
Yeah, I've heard him say, even like with his brother, they can't be in the hot tub and talk about this because they'll end up being hours in there. It's like, you gotta,
they've had to ban the discussion from,
I've heard that
from the hot tub, but his logic is sound, right? If you just look at the total life of our universe at 13.8 billion years, and if you give just any benefit of our, human civilization, the time we've been on Earth, call it 20,000 years of civilization being in existence, well, it's like a fraction out of, 13.8 billion years, right? And if you take with any reasonable expectation on where we're at right now with the quality of virtual reality, and if you just expand that out to 1,000 years as reasonably, right? Eventually you'll have simulations, or at least technology that will be unchallenged from base reality, right? And it'll be indistinguishable. Like, you won't be able to tell the difference between reality and that. So
one of the definitions of a simulation is almost just constantly improving, right? Which is, if you look at even just from our childhood, where it's sort of like Atari or Nintendo, and then, PlayStation or Sega Genesis, PlayStation, Xbox, PlayStation 5, these type of virtual reality, augmented reality, all these things, it is kind of just constantly improving, right? That's the definition essentially of a simulation, I think, is.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just like to think the 13.8 billion years of existence of our universe, at least our known universe.
Yeah.
Right. Who's to say that 21,000 years, we haven't already done this before, right? It's kind of, the chances of this is base reality, meaning that we've never done this before, and we've now just first started building technology.
Like extension, like there was before we got to this point again.
Right. And other worlds, right? And the billions of galaxies that exist, there's probably a good chance this has already happened, right? So if there's an advanced civilization that has that capability to create what you and I know as as reality, who's to say this isn't that simulation? People are running simulation. If you even get a little crazier, if you think about, okay, if you're an advanced species, what would be the right time and right purpose to create a simulation? Well, you kind of probably do it at the cornerstone of when human species interact with technology and the evolution of how human species has evolved with technology, right? Because that's probably a pretty good case study.
Yep.
So, the probability of you and I living, at this point in time, one of the greatest times to be alive, where we're about to hit the singularity, and also to be equipped with the, levels of skills that you and I have to run businesses and actually have an impact. It's like the probability of us, number one, being in this existence is very low, but also the probability of us being in a position where we're able to have and participate and contribute to this, level of impact over the next 20 years. I don't know.
It is mind blowing too. Like that whole thing, it's they're saying about, is your life, if waking up, it's worth, what would you pay to, this 10 million, it's just crazy to think where we are. And it's always perspective. There's always more this, there, that, but it's it is wild to live at this day and age, anywhere in the world, with this information, this access, this opportunity, and these things. It really is just, because even living 200 years ago, anywhere, You know what I mean? It's like what was actually available and happening. Now you can be in the other part of the world and within a day you fly anywhere in the world. It's just crazy. Like, whereas if 200 years ago, if you lived somewhere, you weren't going anywhere.
No,
like you lived in your neighborhood, your town, maybe venture on a ride.
Yeah.
Like you would never go to other cities or go places. There's no way to communicate. It really is like, that's what I was saying before too. It's almost like whatever happens, even in 1,000 years or hopefully everything's going as is. It just, this seems like the actual like best time. Like
it is. I mean, so it's like, you know, I find it incredibly empowering. So, where do you get to eventually when you kind of, okay, you know, maybe we're in a multiverse, right? I mean, there's already evidence now that we are, right? What if this is a simulation, right? Like, okay, we're at a point in time where, you know, there's crazy things happening around us that are evolving every single day.
There's also so much now. There's like, you see if video clips or stuff pops up and then you're like, oh, actually that was fake. Like there's now, it's like hard to even know. In like 5 years, like, you know, like you're not going to be, people are going to get, it's like, how are you going to know? Like back in the day, if a picture came out and something like this and
it's
you know, it's like it was like, oh wow. Now it's like, you don't even know if you believe it or not. And like, how
I find it incredibly empowering, right? Cause like the whole thing is like, so what and why? Right? Well, if I believe that this is a multiverse and my choices impact my reality, or if I believe this is a simulation where ultimately I am the character, I'm the main character in my movie.
Right.
Like I have full control, right? I think the empowering part of that, like the purpose and the why behind all of these theories and, you know, our thoughts of existence is like, hey, I have full control over my experience. Yeah. Right. I literally can manipulate my physical state at any point in time that I want to, you know? And so I find that incredibly meaningful and powerful. And, you know, I find it in a kind of this all around way, you know, another purpose of why we love and love deeply. And, you know, what is that underlying connection that kind of brings everything together and my purpose and why I'm here? I mean, I think it's ultimately to contribute, right? But also to experience. Yeah. And I have control of that experience. And what are the things I care about in this experience? I care about love. I care about my family. I care about the things that are meaningful to me. Right. And I think that is ultimately like what drives me. And
it's very cool. No, it's very interesting time. It is like, I just find myself now daily kind of you can get sucked into a lot of theory.
You can go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, really quick, but a lot easier now in any which direction. Do you want to, for those watching out there, I don't want to get too on a personal level, but I know you have a daughter, is that right? 16.
Yeah, 16 years old.
How has that been with doing a fund and having children and sort of also relationship wise? Again, I don't want to get into too much personal. We can always edit something out, but what about, how has that been, family and having a fund and running this type of business?
Well, I'm definitely an entrepreneur, right? Building arguably 2 businesses, you know, simultaneously. And my time is very, you know, special in where I spend it. But I have the things I try to live by, which is, you know, 3 different things: meaningful relationships, meaningful work, and to realize my full potential so I can do the first 2 things really, really well, right? So, you know, my relationships, you know, really start with my family and most importantly, my daughter. And so I am always, as you and I were talking a little bit before this, I'm reflecting in like the quality of relationship that I have with my daughter. If at any point in time I don't feel like the quality of my relationship is there, then I'm not doing and living by what I believe to be my reason, right, for being here. And, you know, meaningful work is definitely very important. And I have to be able to do meaningful work, find something that I'm good at and have purpose. And I have to also be very healthy mentally, physically, emotionally, right? So managing that and balancing that is honestly, you know, a daily failure. Right. I'm like, you know, constantly trying to think, okay, how can I improve on each of these areas? But, you know, I've been through, you know, quite a bit of a lot, and I feel like, you know, things that I've been through have created a lot of resiliency. And I was just telling you, I lost my parents, you know, pretty young. The person I call my father today is actually my uncle. He adopted me. And he has been my father figure in my life and has kind of given me the ability to take this internal drive and ambition, but steer it in the right direction, because I didn't really have any good guidance growing up. But, obviously, having seen my mother, really drink herself to death, and my biological father, go through, some pretty hard struggles, but, also eventually, looking at his life and at 43 and recognizing he hadn't accomplished everything he wanted to, it was pretty impactful in my life. So I kind of grew up with a lot of challenges, but I think it created a lot of resiliency in who I am, and I'm grateful for those experiences because it's made me who I am today. And through those experiences and recognizing maybe where I didn't have the relationship with my biological father or my relationship with my mother, kind of gives me the fuel and to know where, hey, I need to focus and manage my relationship with my daughter, right?
Yeah.
So I spend a lot of time, which, you and I were talking about a little bit before the show. It's like having more kids, it scares me to death.
Right.
Because,
take away
so I've been one and done for a while, recently going through a separation, which I'm like really good friends with.
That's awesome.
the mother.
That's great.
We're very, very
That's
close.
not always the case. That helps a lot.
She's, 100% my soulmate. And, we just, recognize that I think in order for us to live our fullest potential, it meant that we had to be challenged by living away, living separate and really pursuing hopefully what was in our own purpose. And unfortunately those, didn't align at the moment, but that's also been very growing for me too, as well. Cause always seen myself as a husband and father. And, when that does, get challenged, it forces you to reflect and look at yourself and kind of think, hey, who am I? What am I doing? And I think I've always been pretty, goal oriented and ambitious through my businesses and spend a lot of time, really making sure that we've got the right team and the right resources and all moving in the right direction. So I've learned how to compartmentalize, but on a personal level, I think I've been going through something in my life, my entire adulthood. So if there's any meaning to the universe and why I go through those things, it's hopefully to create a stronger me. So I try to, maintain a very healthy perspective on all those challenges. But I think that's also kind of contributed to me in my work too, as well.
For sure.
Because we're always facing challenging work. But
do you have is there a typical day for you, let's say while you're in Miami? I know you travel a fair amount, so it's not going to, different time zones and probably calls and all this stuff, but like on a week, if you're here in Miami and you get to kind of have your own schedule, what would a typical day look like for you in terms of, gym, meditation? Do you have what's your kind of routine?
My routine has changed over the years, like all the time.
Okay.
But I can tell you right now, I even had like morning routines. I'd wake up at like 4:30 in the morning and have like a 4-hour session of like meditation, gym, journaling, reading, right? Kind of all this stuff. But I was like, man, I'm spending 4 hours of my morning and not progressing on my work.
I mean, listen, if you're up at 4:30 and you do all that though, that's you're ahead of
I'm
people.
I'm definitely not doing that anymore. But like now,
what time would you go to bed when you were doing that?
I mean, when I was going to bed at like 9:30.
Okay.
Right now, if I get to bed 9:30, 10, I've been prioritizing sleep lately. I've recognized that if I don't get a healthy amount of sleep, like waking up without an alarm clock, I'm just not on the same as quick. I'm not right.
What do you think of the Brian Johnson? I actually was supposed to have a dinner with him last week here with a small group of people, and then he didn't make it out. But I'm kind of fat. He's like hot.
I know. I was so upset. I was actually registered for that, so I had like VIP pass and but I was at the same time. My daughter and I headed to boarding schools, right? In London, but I just I really hate that I missed that because I think
I'm sure I
like the dude. I know people have a lot of opinions and stuff.
I actually haven't even seen the documentary yet. I have to watch it. Is it worth watching?
100%.
Yeah. I mean, listen,
it humanizes him.
Even if there's a couple things out of whatever he's doing that I'm sure there's a lot of value.
Absolutely, you don't have to do 100% of the things he's doing. But
he's sort of like we're all rooting for him.
Absolutely,
he's like
the
hope it works out.
He's like
good news for everyone if it does. But
I respect that, right? I respect that.
How much of that do you think is true? Do you think he really is like optimized almost as much as possible? Or maybe he's talking about 50 or 100 pills a day now. And then it goes into like now there's like a sales thing, which, again, if he's learning and if it's good, it could be interesting. But
I understand the business side of that, right? I mean, he's also spending like $2.5 million a year on himself.
Right.
You gotta make some money.
Right.
Support
they can go fast.
Stuff he's doing is not cheap.
Right.
But honestly, I I don't know. I don't think I'm well qualified enough to like answer definitively on whether or not it's like, true or not true. I think at the end of the day, what matters is, how are you taking care of yourself at like the basic fundamental level?
Yeah.
Are you sleeping enough? Are you eating well? Are you,
those
working out? Like
those aren't really,
you can get past this thing and you want to optimize for like an additional 10% performance. Then you kind of get into all these other
it's
things
like golf
that you can do.
Or whatever. You shoot 120, but to get down to 95, it's like, okay, not rocket science. You want to get down and shooting scratch and you're shaving a stroke or two at that level. It's you got to do some things others are not willing to do. But interesting. It is interesting, sort of in the scope of everything nowadays, and he's sort of at the post.
Yeah, good analogy too, by the way. I've been playing golf my entire life. I, at one point, thought I was going to go professional.
Okay. Well, so you're shooting in the 70s, low 70s.
Yeah. But my point, my daughter was born, I kind of gave it up.
Golf is a big, that's one thing I like about paddle, and I don't want to go into a rant on it because I love it, and that's what I focus on now, padel or paddle, however you want to call it. But that sport takes less time. It's very social, it's very fun, because like golf is a, 5 hour, 6 hour, depending if you got to drive somewhere. That's like a whole day. Whereas, padel, you can do like an hour and a half.
That's like the thing in Miami to do that, right? I have not done it yet. I know you
will love it, and you'll be obsessed. You will be obsessed. It's a nice compromise from golf, because it's about a third the time, and you get good exercise, and it's like,
and it's complementary, right, to your kind of daily activities.
Yes.
And for me, I'm a little crazy working out. I work out 6 days a week, and I do, hypertrophic stuff, just kind of muscle growth. And I don't train for strength or endurance. I probably need to do more cardio, so that'd probably be a nice.
Yeah, it's a nice, that would be a good cardio addition for sure. Well, it's super interesting. I think, again, and I did, before I forget, one of the last questions that I did have within poker, because I know you're not a poker professional. You play poker. You obviously know how to carry yourself at the table and play and have a good idea how it goes. What would you say, is there anything, Ben, in poker that you could attribute to business, or things that you sort of take away from that or think that correlate well?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, poker is about, managing risk and knowing outcomes right before you make those moves, or know the possibility of outcomes before you make those moves. In business, it somewhat translates to the same thing. Now, for me, we played pot limit, PLO, right? Omaha. I didn't like it because I feel like I didn't have any control. Right? It's like, I don't like playing things I don't have control over.
More volatility.
Yeah, it's just a little more volatility. So, in business, I try not to get into things that I don't have control over, right? And so you can take risk, right? You can quantify and measure risk, but you better have some element of controlling that risk. And so, venture is, again, probably the riskiest game in finance that you're playing. But I'd like to say
PLO of finance.
Yeah, I'd like to say that it's managed risk.
Got it.
Right? Like, there are ways to manage risk and there are ways to make bets, and you have to do the work. Like, there's no shortcuts to understanding the odds. There are no shortcuts to understanding the potential outcomes, right? And, sometimes I think you just can't do that. If you're in the beginning and you're trying to make certain bets, can't do that without doing the work and doing the homework behind it to know your odds, know how you're playing. So until I spend a whole bunch more time understanding PLO and all the odds associated, I won't play, because I won't feel like I can have a certain amount of control around it, right? So I would say that's kind of the biggest relationship to,
makes sense. And I guess
in my mind, right?
For sure. Well,
and the people, aside from the people component, right? There's
definitely. And we'll have to, I'm sure we could spend an entire podcast and have a follow-up on like a couple of these subsections alone. They're very interesting to talk about, but I will ask about, for those that maybe have thought about, they want to start a fund, or they're thinking of going to school and sort of looking and going down that path, what would be advice you would say for today for those people? And also, what is something that maybe was harder than you realized, or you're like, wow, like if I didn't realize this, I wish I had known how it was going to be, that this was something kind of unexpected that's been a challenge within this business?
Yeah, I mean, again, venture capital is risky, so you've got to have an edge. Like, you've got to have an edge on where you're looking, especially to get investors it to a point where they're ready to give you their money.
What would you say? What is your edge
Right.
in this?
Our edge is we're not generalists, we're specialists, right? We focus on a specific industry where we have certain access that most other investors don't have access, and we have the ability to actually influence an outcome of the investments we make, right? So that's the edge. So we're sourcing and we're managing better than just a generalist, because the aerospace and defense deep tech industry, right? It's a very complex market. If you're getting into, for me, for example, if I'm underwriting a piece of medical equipment, right, that requires FDA approval, I have no idea what that world looks like, right? Or where to start even assessing risk in that market. So what we do is we get really good at understanding our industry. We get really good at understanding the technologies that are driving value creation in our industry. So if you're going to get into venture and you're going to start raising a fund, you better have an edge. That would be my first
sort of niche.
You've got to have it. On what is going to cause an investor to give you their money and to trust that you're going to be a very good fiduciary of that money.
Got it.
You've got to have an edge. And the second thing I would say is you better be prepared to sacrifice, because raising your first fund is a long and gut-wrenching process, and raising capital and hearing no, right, is really heavy on you, right?
What percent of the serious people you think you look at and you're like, you talk with or go through the process of sending them a deck and talking to them and calls and all that, what percent of people actually do end up investing? Is it surprising to you? At
the beginning, we had probably about a 20% hit rate, right? Which is very high because we were hitting our friends and family and people that already knew us and trusted us, right? If you're out there in the market raising for people that don't know you, it's much, much lower, right? So you're having hundreds of meetings to get like one check. And you just better be prepared. And as a fund manager, unless you are personally wealthy, right, you're going to have to fund yourself for a little while, because the areas that we make money is in what's called carry interest. It's a share of the profits when the companies sell and or liquidate, right? When we put money in, the only way we get money back is when those companies sell.
Actually sell, yeah.
Right? And so we get 20% of the profits when it sells. So for example, if we invest in a company that's worth $100 million, right? And we invested $1 million in that. So we own 1% of the company, right? The company then becomes $1 billion. Well, if you've got a $10 million check, in essence, if assuming no dilution coming back to the fund, and you've raised, 15 million and you've invested 15 million, technically you don't even get any of that 10 million, because that goes all back to paying your investors first.
Right.
So you have to pay your investors back first. But the outcome is, once you get multiple exits or one exit that pays like 100 times, pays back the whole fund, then you start sharing the profits. And listen, investing and then exiting takes time. Startups takes time. And it's the average exit timeline is 7 years.
Got it.
So you better be ready to ride that wave. And you get a little bit of management fee income to help kind of keep the lights on, but you're not making money on that. That's not the purpose.
You have to be successful. You've got
to invest right, and you've got to be able to exit that position that's going to generate a return above and beyond whatever capital you've invested in order to make any money.
Got it.
So just be prepared, right? If it's really what you feel like you're put on this earth to do, because it's a 10-year commitment minimum, right, for when you start. So you are committing yourself for a 10-year timeline no matter what. Yeah. Right? You're committing to your investors. You are going to be in this, so you better be ready to ride that wave.
Very cool. If you could do, last question, if you could have a dinner, let's say of 6, so the 5 people you haven't met before, but that give me a couple, or it doesn't have to be 5 people, give me a couple of people that you think would be interesting, that you kind of know, but you haven't got to know them, that you would like to sit down with, say living right now.
David Freeberg, Chamath Palihapitiya, right? Like those two. Like I just watched an interview on the All In podcast. Okay. What's his name?
Those guys are all coming out here. I'll go. We'll say.
Oh, I know, man. I mean, obviously, right? Those guys are like titans in my industry.
They love poker too. Chamath has a great poker game.
These guys are, a ton of respect for them. Would we say Tom Bilyeu? He was the founder of Quest Nutrition. And is right now kind of building a building a studio that's doing kind of cartoon, kind of competing with Disney a little bit, big goals and dreams. But he created this Impact Theory podcast show that invites like very successful people. And quite honestly, I mean, listening to him and listening to other people, kind of what they went through and the hard struggles that they had in their life, like that changed me. Like, so it's more of a personal level, and you know, his purpose and the things that he's done to impact my life. Or I would say I just would love to just shake his hand. Right. But he thinks about, you know, a lot of these things like I do. So yeah, that's that. And then I would say, you know, honestly, I would love to, you know, talk to the people that are forefront of some of the biggest technology changes and just listen, you know? And I think Ray Kurzweil is definitely up there. I would have that at that table. And probably some big, you know, tech CEOs that, you know, can really give me a little bit more insight on like, hey, what's going on in the world, things that I don't see.
I saw that Mark Cuban was saying about, you know, if you're 21 or you're young, and you should just basically learn, be immersed, know AI in and out, like be completely enthralled in that. Is that makes sense to you? I mean, that's just where we're going and what you want to know right now.
I think, anything and everything that you don't know, right, that has some impact to how our world is evolving and changing is an area of focus.
Yes.
AI is just one component of that, right? Like we talked about earlier, biotech and nanotech are also areas that are going to impact, you know, the next 1,000 years. So, you know, there's just so much that you can get into, and you just have to really do some deep soul searching and kind of figure out what makes you tick. But also, in my mind, I think you really don't know what you are until you get exposure. So like getting exposure across multiple areas to give you a sense of like, hey, what drives you, what gives you that sense of fire? Yeah, you know, I think is the right place to look.
Very cool. Well, yeah, that's great stuff. And again, we want to thank Kyle for his time. I appreciate it so much being on the show today. We'll have to have a follow-up in the future, and I'm sure we'll play more poker and we'll have some fun, and we'll definitely run it back on the podcast. But I appreciate the time so much. Thank you. And we'll do it again. If anyone wants more info on with particularly your fund, I know, and socially, do you, with any of where can they either follow you or get more information? His website or Twitter?
And I'm horrible social media, but
that's
LinkedIn,
a good sign.
LinkedIn.
Okay, for a fund manager, I don't want to see you out on the.
I got like 140 followers on Instagram.
I bet.
Yeah. But LinkedIn obviously is where we spend most of our time. But www.axv.vc is our website for the fund, and then www.singularitycapadvisors.com is the M&A advisory firm.
Okay.
But yeah, on LinkedIn, man, we've got a good marketing team that's doing a pretty good job. We're doing, you know, hosting events all over the country and participating, co-hosting, you know, on just like big conventions and just a lot of stuff that's happening. So we can, if you go to any one of those deep tech or aerospace, you know, places, we're usually in some way embedded into them. But and obviously, you can find us kind of on the main sites there.
Very cool. Appreciate the time. And again, Kyle Mounts, another episode of The Flow Show. Everyone at home, thank you for watching. Let us know in the comments below what you thought. And if you have questions, I'm sure we can get those answered for you as well. We will see you on the show next week.